Hello, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Unfit to Print. I'm your host, Athey. I'm the Washington editor for The Spectator World and a senior Blankley Fellow with the Steamboat Institute, and am really excited to finally be able to share this with you guys. I've been working on this for quite some time now with my producer, and we are just really grateful to be able to finally put this product out into the world. Some of you may remember that I had a podcast under the same name with the Daily Caller and have been asking me when I'm going to bring it back. So congratulations, I guess. The day is finally here. And really what sparked my desire to relaunch this podcast was a pretty crappy situation that happened to me. And I will tell you guys all of the details on that in just a moment. But in the meantime, this podcast is totally independent. We are not being backed by any corporate media outlets or any outside funders at the moment. So it would be really appreciated if you guys showed your support by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and then we also have a donation page set up at amberathey.supercast.com, and you guys can give as much or as little as you want. Obviously, any amount is greatly appreciated, just so we can cover the cost of putting on this podcast for you guys. And, you know, hopefully at some point make it profitable. I think that would be really cool. But for right now, this is a passion project for me. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. And again, I mentioned that something kind of awful happened that made me decide to finally do it. And I imagine that many of you have probably already heard about this, but basically what happened is I was a part-time radio host for WMAL in DC for about 6 months officially. I'd been doing the show for about a year at that point. And they fired me over a joke about Kamala Harris's State of the Union outfit. I wish there was more to the story. It sounds pretty silly and ridiculous. Like, did you really just get fired because you made fun of Kamala's outfit? And the truth is, yeah, that's pretty much exactly what happened. So I will retell you guys the full story. Basically, on the night of the State of the Union, I guess it was March 1st, if I remember correctly, I was out at trivia with some friends, and we were kind of keeping track of the State of the Union on Twitter. I saw Kamala's outfit, didn't think it was very flattering. Brown is a pretty boring color to wear. Women are usually told, by the way, to wear bright colors on camera. I'm doing it right now just because it draws the viewer's eye. It's very flattering. And Kamala chose this kind of dingy brown thing. It honestly looked maybe like a Hershey's chocolate bar. So me being the fashion critic that I am, and not that I'm some, Vogue cover gracing human, but I think I have a slight sense of style, decided to throw out a tweet just kind of cracking fun at this outfit. And my tweet said, "Kamala looks like a UPS employee. What can Brown do for you? Nothing good, apparently." That was it. That was the joke. And I'll explain it for anybody who didn't get it. I think it's kind of obvious, but apparently there are quite a few people out there who don't know the UPS slogan used to be, "What can Brown do for you?" So the comment, of course, Kamala looks like a UPS employee, is referring to the clothes that she was wearing. The "What can Brown do for you?" is a reference to the old UPS slogan, which was about their uniforms. And then the "nothing good apparently" is just a little crack about the fact that I think Kamala Harris is a terrible vice president and politician in general. Really wasn't that deep, but a couple of days after I sent that tweet, there were some left-wing activists on Twitter who got really upset over a completely separate issue. And this is usually how cancel culture works. It's never really the offense that they claim it is. It's usually something else about you that they don't like, and they have to find anything they can to pin on you to make you be a bad person and therefore cancelable. So in this case, what it was is there had been these protests at the University of North Texas. And they had brought in, the young conservatives at the University of North Texas had brought in this guy by the name of Jeff Younger. And Jeff Younger is a dad who is now running for a local Texas House seat, who had lost custody of his son because his ex-wife was convinced that the son was actually a daughter named Luna, and she would dress him up in dresses and grow out his hair. And the dad said, when Luna, or I forget what the kid's actual name is, obviously not Luna, when the kid is with me, he never shows any interest in wearing dresses. He doesn't show any interest in being a girl. And yet the ex-wife had managed to convince the courts and, had some wacky gender doctors backing her up to say that the son was actually a daughter, and Jeff Younger lost custody. So he goes to the University of North Texas, and his whole platform is to criminalize gender transitions for children. So people who are minors and otherwise cannot consent to major medical decisions should not be allowed to get on puberty blockers or hormone therapy or do surgical alterations to their body before they hit the age of 18. I think it's a pretty reasonable position. The people at the University of North Texas did not. They launched a pretty violent protest where they chased this young conservative woman into a closet, janitor's closet, and her and Jeff Younger both had to be escorted off the campus by police. In the process of police leaving the campus, a group of rowdy protesters decided to try to block the cop car from leaving. And so the cop car, is slowly inching forward, trying to get through. And apparently, one of the protesters rolls their ankle in the process and starts claiming that they've been run over by the cop car. And that became the dominant narrative for the left was, oh, well, conservatives brought this guy in and then they ran over a protester and could have killed somebody. And there was specifically one guy, Rolling Stone reporter named Stephen Monticelli, who was really pushing this in the replies to a tweet from Matt Walsh. I called him out on it. I said, have you even watched the video of what happened? Because it makes it pretty obvious that this person was, trying to impede an emergency vehicle. And Stephen Monticelli didn't respond by actually addressing any of the points that I made, because why would he? He knows that I'm right. Instead, him and some of his followers started digging through my Twitter history to try to find something to shut me up. And lo and behold, they settled on this Kamala tweet about her outfit, saying that she looked like a UPS employee. And they reframed this tweet as being racist, saying that the "What can brown do for you" comment was not about Kamala's outfit, but about her skin color. I don't know many people that would be stupid enough to have a career in conservative media, and then all of a sudden one day they're like, you know what I'm going to tweet about? I'm going to tweet about how Kamala is brown and brown people aren't good at anything. That just defies all basic logic that I would just tweet something like that. But these people don't believe in, being charitable to people, and also their first thought is always to go to somebody's race. So that's what happened. They started sending this tweet around, and naturally, some of them decided to start emailing my employers and claim that I was a racist and that I needed to be fired. I actually mocked the efforts at cancellation on Twitter at the time because I thought it was so ridiculous that I tagged The Spectator and WMAL, the radio station where I had been working, basically saying, try away, guys. Everybody knows this tweet is not racist. This is such a joke. Which I think is how people should respond to cancel culture. I'm obviously not going to grovel or apologize or beg for forgiveness from, one, people who hate me no matter what I do, and two, for something that wasn't even wrong. This tweet was totally benign. But anyway, The Spectator got maybe 2 emails from these people and just laughed and deleted them because they thought the whole thing was ridiculous. But WMAL, which is owned by a company called Cumulus Media, which owns tons of radio stations across the country, a lot of them conservative. So I got a call from 2 Cumulus Media executives, one of whom is named Jeff Bowden. He is the head of DC operations for the company. And then Kristen Fancelis is the vice president of human resources. And while they were on the phone with me, they told me that they heard about this tweet, or the tweet had been brought to their attention, and they don't condone racism, thereby suggesting that they believe that the tweet was racist, and told me that I violated their social media policy and I was going to be terminated effective immediately. I wasn't offered the chance to explain the tweet. I wasn't offered, an apology in exchange for a suspension, not that I would apologize anyway. And I wasn't really offered any chance to defend myself at all. And that was almost the worst part of it, was that these corporate executives decided to take the word of some random Twitter activists over their own employee who had been working at least part-time for them for about 3 years. So that was really disappointing. And I will say, in the aftermath, the other WMAL hosts were really great about supporting me. They tried really hard to get me back on the air. They were lobbying pretty much nonstop. That includes Larry O'Connor, my co-host on the show. And I was really grateful for that. But after about a month, we kind of determined that they weren't going to be changing their mind, and we had exhausted really all of our options. So I decided to go public with what happened because I thought it was really important for the world to know that this company that makes, millions upon millions of dollars on conservative content clearly did not believe in the values and principles that make that content so attractive to listeners and gets people to tune in every day. And it just seemed so backwards to me. That's corporate America for you, but it was such a great injustice that I just thought people needed to know. And certainly other employees of Cumulus Media needed to be made aware of this so that they could protect themselves accordingly. But it also was a really, really great thing in terms of how much support I received after I went public. People were really great about it. I received a lot of really wonderful words of encouragement, even from some rather unlikely sources. And it really did inform my decision to restart this podcast, which is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time and just really hadn't found the right moment. And this just felt like the right time. So I'm really excited to be bringing it to you. And if this is a good thing that comes out of me being fired, then that's enough for me. So thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening and watching over the past, few years. And thanks for coming back. And if you'd like to continue supporting my work, then you can subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and also maybe throw a little donation my way at amberathey.supercast.com. And we have a really great show lined up for you guys. I'm covering a lot of topics today. It's been a while since I've been able to speak unfiltered to an audience, so I'm really excited to be able to do that. We're going to be covering the New York Times hit piece on Tucker Carlson. I have a monologue on Elon Musk buying Twitter and the Biden administration hiring this disinformation czar. We're going to give you updates on the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. We've got the White House Correspondents Association dinner, the leak of the Roe v. Wade decision out of the Supreme Court. Lots of really great stuff. So stay tuned. And again, please subscribe and donate if you can. So I'm bringing you guys a little bit of a breaking news segment here. As you know, I record the show in advance, and I'm currently filming on Tuesday, May 3rd, around 1:15 p.m. Eastern. So if anything happens between now and when you watch this on Wednesday, you'll know that's why it wasn't included. But for right now, I can only give you the updated information as I have it. On Monday night, Politico reported that they had received a draft majority opinion from Justice Sam Alito that said the Supreme Court was prepared to overturn Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade, of course, being the landmark case that said abortion is a right under the Constitution. For years, conservatives and originalist justices have been saying that this was a very poorly decided case. And let's go ahead and start with the good. The good is that if the Supreme Court does go ahead and overturn Roe v. Wade, states across the country can pass legislation further restricting the ability of women to kill their children. As a pro-life person, that is obviously wonderful news. Now let's get to the bad news. This is unprecedented for an opinion from the Supreme Court to be leaked like this. The Supreme Court is usually considered completely leak-proof. And not only that, but leak-proof especially when it comes to what they're deciding on cases. Right? So recently there was another leak out of the Supreme Court about the fact that Justice Kennedy was planning on retiring. And that was considered a huge deal at the time, not just because Kennedy was retiring and Biden would be able to replace him with Ketanji Brown Jackson, but again, because this was the first time really in recent memory that the Supreme Court had had such major news leak from its chambers. Now it's happened again, but in an even bigger circumstance in terms of the Supreme Court overruling perhaps one of the biggest and most consequential decisions in its history. I can only guess as to what the motivation was here, but I also think it's pretty obvious. Somebody from one of the liberal justices' chambers, probably a clerk, saw that this was coming down the line, didn't know what they could do to stop it because the court had seemingly already decided, and thought that they could pressure the court into changing its opinion. So they leaked this majority opinion, which was a draft according to Chief Justice John Roberts, to Politico, so that these wacky pro-abortion protesters would go down to the Supreme Court and bang on the doors and act like a bunch of wackadoodles. They would maybe show up at the justices' homes. There would be opinion pieces about how this is going to kill women and bring back coat hanger abortions. All of this intended to intimidate and shame the justices into changing their opinion and keeping Roe v. Wade enshrined in law. That's what the left does. Those are the types of tactics that they use. I mean, we talked earlier in this episode about what happened to me because I dared to criticize Kamala Harris. They intimidated a corporation into firing me. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't use that same mob-like tactic to try to change the opinion of the Supreme Court. These are the same people, by the way, that are always waxing poetic about how Trump was undermining our institutions and people weren't going to have faith in their government anymore, and he was encroaching on the independence of the judicial branch. Now you have former Hillary people tweeting about how the clerk who leaked this information was brave, stunning and brave, and deserves hero status because they broke this confidentiality of the court. Chief Justice John Roberts has already announced an investigation to try to figure out who did this, and I hope to God they find them, because that person needs to be blacklisted from anything involving law for their entire life. I mean, I really can't overstate how terrible this is for the impartiality of the court and their ability to make decisions without fear of this intimidation from the left. It really sets a horrible, horrible precedent. I don't think we should be surprised if there are riots that break out because of this decision. If we know anything about the pro-abortion activists, it's that they're pretty demonic and will do anything to get their way. And I don't really buy the idea that I've heard from a lot of conservatives that this is really politically unpopular for Republicans and will hurt them in the midterms, because people often forget that most Americans actually support pretty strict restrictions on abortion. So the Democrats could tomorrow decide that they would pass legislation codifying Roe v. Wade into law, but they won't do that because the vast majority of Americans believe in placing restrictions on abortions after the first trimester. And most people are pro-life culturally. And the younger generations actually tend to be more pro-life than older generations, which is a really interesting trend. So it's really not like this bomb dropped on Republicans' chances in the midterms, I don't think. And all of these other issues that are facing Americans, whether it's inflation, the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan and concerns about national security, immigration, crime, all of these issues are still definitely going to be on the table. And the abortion issue ultimately is a distraction. Because again, we also know that getting rid of Roe v. Wade doesn't automatically make abortion illegal across the entire United States. It simply hands the issue back to the states. And so maybe there are some wacky Democrats who will vote on that issue in local and state races, but Republicans really need to make the case that this is not something that is affected usually by Congress. So that's a way to sort of push off that distraction. Now, I think the other good thing about this is that it totally vindicates people who voted for Donald Trump because they wanted him to be able to appoint conservative judges and justices to the Supreme Court in particular. And there was kind of this mocking term going around for people who voted that way. And the phrase was "but Gorsuch," and it was really just making fun of the evangelical Christians. Every time Trump did something they didn't like, they would make fun of them and say, "Oh, well, you voted for this guy for the Supreme Court, but look at what he's doing now." Well, if the Supreme Court has finally overturned Roe v. Wade, thanks to the appointments of President Donald Trump, then yes, but Gorsuch. Totally but Gorsuch. These people are so vindicated. They were exactly right to do what they did. And all of the David Frenches and Jonah Goldbergs of the world have once again been proven wrong, and I think that's beautiful. But let's be clear, nothing more beautiful than saving the lives of the unborn children. That, of course, is the best part of this. And, oh yeah, the lib meltdown's going to be pretty great too. So I don't know if you guys have been following much from the New York Times lately, but it's safe to say they have gone fully down the left-wing woke rabbit hole and are really just publishing a bunch of content for, I guess, like liberal line moms on Twitter who also happen to be New York Times subscribers. That's pretty much all they have now is like wealthy, overeducated white women. And so they have to cater to that audience. Otherwise, their subscriberships are just going to go down the drain. But they published this article this week. There's two articles I'm going to talk about, but this is the first one. And the first one is about a book called Genderqueer. And this book is actually a graphic novel. And it became part of the political conversation last year because there was a mom in Fairfax County who found out that this book was in her kid's library and discovered that it had some pretty pornographic material in it. So there's this, cartoon depiction of kids involved in sexual acts with one another and kink adjacent sexual acts, mind you. And so this mom goes to a school board meeting and she starts reading out some of the actual passages from the book. And they tell her that she's not actually allowed to read them at the school board meeting because there are children in the room and they don't want the children to hear what's in the book. Yet somehow it's perfectly okay for the book to be in the school's library. Makes no sense. But this book became probably one of the biggest flashpoints in terms of the parental rights movement across the country because parents found out that this book was pretty much all over the country in school libraries. And the New York Times seeks to tell the story of the author of this graphic novel. And this is a woman by the name of Maya Kobabe. But Maya does not want to be called a woman or he, she, or anything because Maya identifies as non-binary, which I guess means you don't feel like a boy or a girl. And the way that she describes it is really weird because she says, like, well, I just wanted to be me. I didn't want to be a boy or a girl, which sounds more like, a case of hyper-individualism than being non-binary. But what do I know? So this person, Maya, says that she wrote this book because she wanted other individuals who are grappling with the same identity crisis to be able to know what labels to use to describe themselves and how to identify and how to explain it to other people and blah, blah, blah. So it's sort of this like indoctrination effort for non-binary, genderqueer individuals, which is not a thing. You're male or female. You're a boy or girl, but whatever. If we're going on through the New York Times article, it gets pretty insane because the New York Times article never actually quotes any of the passages specifically that parents had an issue with, one of which describes two non-binary individuals discussing having sex with a strap-on dildo and giving each other blowjobs, and another one is about a minor fantasizing about sex between two men. And again, this is a book that was in school libraries for children to have access to. I don't know any sane person that would argue that that is age-appropriate content. But the New York Times claims, of course, that this is all about being anti-LGBTQ, that we just hate gay people and we don't want our children to even know that gay people exist, and it's all of the same nonsense that was surrounding the Florida Parental Rights and Education Bill, which they, of course, dubbed the Don't Say Gay Bill. So you go through the article, they refuse to actually talk about the real reason why parents are upset. And it says that it became a target because, quote, it's a graphic memoir that deals with puberty and sexual identity. But then it goes on to admit it includes a few drawings of nude characters in sexual scenarios. Images that critics of the book were able to share on social media to stoke a backlash. Well, here's the thing, right? If you share the images and people are upset about them, maybe the problem is with the images and not the individuals reacting. If everybody sees the same image and thinks that it's a problem, then maybe some self-awareness would dictate that it's actually the images themselves that are problematic. But the New York Times doesn't get to that logic. That's just too complicated. It has to be that everybody is just homophobic and transphobic. So then they go on and they talk about how the book arrived in the middle of a politically and emotionally charged debate about gender identity and transgender rights. I personally am not aware of any rights that don't belong to transgender individuals compared to the rights that everybody else has in this country. But it seems increasingly that LGBTQ plus alphabet soup rights really just means they want special, additional protections compared to other Americans. But either way, this New York Times explanation of why this book became really the flashpoint for these discussions, it misses the real reason, right? Because it's not that the book arrived in the middle of a politically charged debate about gender identity. It's that during the pandemic, parents were able to listen to what their kids were learning in class and in school and started realizing that they needed to pay greater attention because the kids were learning some pretty messed up shit. And one of those things, in addition to critical race theory, was this, made up reality about non-binary, genderqueer, and all of these other made up identities for people to feel like they're special and to get attention and all of that other stuff. So it wasn't that parents were all of a sudden like, we need to go after gender identity. It was that they found out it was already in the kids' schools and they wanted to combat it and get it out of the kids' schools. This is a culture war that was created by the left, right? So everyone said when Obergefell legalized gay marriage that was the end of the argument and that there would be no other like weird sex or gender issues popping up. And then a couple of years down the line, lo and behold, we have people who want to like identify as horses. And we're supposed to refer to them by horse pronouns and treat them like they're a horse. Otherwise, we're bigots. So this was the left's doing. This is the left continuing to take everything too far and not only having their just not truthful or reality-based ideas, but then using them to indoctrinate children in public schools, which are taxpayer-funded institutions, and therefore, obviously, parents should have a say in what their kids are learning. Even if they weren't paying, though, like, every parent has a right to decide what their kid learns. That's just the fundamental basic humanity of being a parent, is that you get to decide for your kid. Nobody else gets to decide for your kid unless you're being abusive. Obviously, there are exceptions, but the general principle is that you get to decide for your kid. The New York Times doesn't respect that. All this entire article turns into is just whining and moaning that this poor author was trying to do a good thing in basically grooming kids by putting these pornographic materials in their library. And oh, boo-hoo, won't anyone think of this poor author who just wanted to help the children. It's so ridiculous. But unfortunately, that is not the only crazy article that the New York Times published this week. So this second New York Times article is actually about Tucker Carlson, and it's not just one article. It's a 3-part investigative series. So like they really went all out for this one. This one's authored by Nick Confessore, who's been with the New York Times for quite some time. And this 3-part investigative series is basically trying to tell readers that Tucker's a racist. And the New York Times says that Tucker is a racist because, of course, they want to get him off the air. Why? Because he talks about a whole lot of issues that the left doesn't want you to talk about. He talks about things that are a bit messy, that are complicated, that don't really fit neatly into this narrative that the New York Times, of all places, has laid out for Americans. And his show does really well because Americans want to explore those issues. They want to hear that someone is taking their concerns seriously rather than just feeding them this propaganda from a left-wing government. So Tucker, for example, talks about issues like the long-term effects of unfettered immigration on a culture and an economy. He talks about issues of crime. He talks about issues of how so many of our problems in society are class-based problems, not race-based problems, like the left would have you believe. And all of this kind of boils down to the idea that there's a narrative from elites that wants to divide people up based on lines of race and gender, because they don't want people to realize that a lot of their problems are class-oriented. So that's really the crux of Tucker's show, at least the way that I view it. But the New York Times goes through and says that if you talk about any of these issues, you're just a racist, you are peddling in conspiracy theories. And he says, as an objective fact, that Tucker's show, quote, may be the most racist program in the history of cable news. This isn't an opinion or a take, he says. It's a fact, supported by our content analysis of 1,150 episodes of Tucker Carlson tonight. And I would love to know which episodes they're watching, really, because if we're being honest with ourselves, the left will find racism in anything a conservative says. I mean, we've already heard that at the beginning of the podcast when I talked about what happened to me, where something as simple as criticizing the most powerful woman in the world's outfit was considered racist. So I don't put too much stock into what Nick Confessori at the New York Times describes as racist when he's watching Tucker Carlson. Here's what he counts as racist. That there are violent Black Lives Matter protesters in cities. That's a fact. There was a whole 2020 summer of love where Black Lives Matter and Antifa-led protests turned violent, looted, burned down storefronts, broke and entered and destroyed entire communities, led to people dying through the use of these autonomous zones in Seattle, and killed people who tried to protect storefronts. So that's not racist. That's true. It says that you're not allowed to say that migrants with diseases are coming from south of the border. Wasn't that the whole point of Title 42 that the Biden administration is repealing? That migrants who cross the southern border aren't subjected to the same health screenings as American citizens, and therefore they can't come in because we're in the middle of a pandemic? Wasn't that the whole point of that? And he goes on and talks about some of these other issues. He's racist for saying that refugees bring in alien cultures, even though we've already seen that quite a few of the Afghan refugees that we brought in after the horrible Afghanistan withdrawal have tried to rape children, beat their wives, and engaged in a lot of other really horrible criminal acts that don't comport with American culture, American values, which are not race-based values. Those are citizen-based values. Those are American values, okay? And they're going to say that because you think different cultures have different values, that's racist. It's nonsense. The whole article is nonsense. 3-part investigative series, because it's not just an article. So he goes on to say that, Tucker is in bed with white nationalists and neo-Nazis and alt-right types. And the point of the article is clear. There's been all of these efforts to cancel Tucker over the years, whether from Media Matters trying to go after his advertisers or boycotts from places like Sleeping Giants, and all of them have failed because Tucker, again, is tackling really important issues. The American people like to hear about these issues because they can't hear about them anywhere else because everybody else has been censored or fired or destroyed. And Tucker's sort of like the last beacon, but also a pioneer. And the New York Times is really scared of that because they can't control what he says on air. They don't have a monopoly on information anymore. So they're threatened by Tucker, so they're trying to destroy him. That's all this investigative series is. I don't really recommend going to give the New York Times your clicks, but if you just want to see how they operate, I think it is important to go read the 3-part investigative series just to see how dishonest they are. Because these are really some of the most loathsome people in the world. It's time for this week's monologue. Elon Musk officially purchased Twitter for $44 billion last week. The Tesla billionaire said he wants to turn Twitter into a place for, quote, maximum fun. And Twitter was fun. Before the days of shadow banning, prohibiting users from telling journalists to learn to code, and punishing the New York Post for reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop, Twitter was a place where any American could have their voice heard, participate in debate, tell jokes, and create a following without fear of being censored. Now you have to constantly worry about the Twitter hall monitors lurking around every corner, eager to misapply the site's terms of service to silence effective conservative messengers. The left is not happy that Musk's reign may bring about a freer social media platform. If they had it their way, the only speech allowed on Twitter would be propaganda posters for the Biden administration. Remember, Elon Musk has two stated goals for Twitter. He wants to bring back a culture of free speech, and he wants content moderation to be done in a politically neutral manner. The left's opposition to this is an admission that they are happy that Twitter's policies are currently used to disproportionately silence conservatives and give a free pass to the left. The left opposes the basic principle of free speech because they know it would allow people to criticize them and their policies. They call this harassment, I call it accountability, and it is vital for a functioning democratic republic. The media, meanwhile, is operating in its usual role as a tool of the left and is relentlessly attacking Musk's Twitter takeover. The Washington Post actually published an article claiming that the real problem is that a single billionaire will own Twitter. Does someone want to remind them which news outlet Jeff Bezos owns? Of course, the media doesn't really care about Musk's wealth. They just want to continue to have a monopoly on what information is shared on social media. Unfortunately, we have bigger problems to worry about than just Twitter. Have you noticed over the past couple of years that media companies and Democratic politicians are increasingly using the words misinformation and disinformation? What's that about? Well, it was considered misinformation to say that vaccines do not prevent you from catching or spreading COVID. It's considered misinformation to say that there are only two genders, or that Rachel Levine is a man, or that voter fraud is real and happened in the 2020 election. These are totally true statements, but the left calls them misinformation or disinformation because they don't comport with their made-up realities. Just a few weeks ago, former President Barack Obama claimed that disinformation is killing people and that it can cause democracy to wither. Let's accept the premise. Would more or fewer people have died overall if we were able to more readily challenge the medical establishment's insistence on locking down the entire country in response to the coronavirus outbreak? What if we had been allowed to discuss the benefits of early therapeutic treatments for those who caught the virus, rather than focusing all of our efforts on masking and vaccinations? There is a real human benefit to being able to freely debate these issues, and a real human cost to shutting down dissenting opinions. Nonetheless, the Biden administration announced a new head of the Department of Homeland Security's Disinformation Governance Board this week. Secretary Mayorkas claimed this board is meant to combat foreign interference campaigns, but the Biden administration has made it quite clear that this is going to operate more like a real-life ministry of truth. That's all thanks to the appointment of Nina Jankovics, a former high school theater nerd who dreamed really big and grew up to become a political hack. Here she is singing about misinformation as a sort of deranged Mary Poppins.
Laundering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. When Rudy Giuliani shared bad intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice or vote. Oh, information laundering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origin seems slightly less atrocious.
Jankovics is responsible for spreading her own disinformation, such as suggesting that the Hunter Biden laptop reported on by the New York Post wasn't real. She also hilariously claims to be an expert on Russian disinformation, but fell head over heels for the now discredited Steele dossier, which has been confirmed to contain fabricated material from Russian sources seeking to sow political division in the United States. This is a theme across the Biden administration, which can't even admit that record-high boarding crossings constitutes a crisis and shops propaganda to media outlets about the allegedly booming Biden economy. The real purpose of the Biden administration's fight against disinformation is to make sure that they can't be called out on the lies they spread to the American people. The goal is to criminalize diversity of opinion, whether on Elon Musk's Twitter or anywhere else. But don't worry, on this show, we will always tell you the truth, regardless of how many Broadway tunes Nina Jankovic remixes for her TikTok account. The White House Correspondents' dinner returned after a 2-year absence because of the coronavirus pandemic, and it was just as insufferable as we all remember. Remember that Trump didn't go to the White House Correspondents' dinner because he thought it was all just a joke and a reason for liberal media to pat each other on the back. He was totally right, by the way. And of course, there was also that issue with that horrible comedian that made these really awful jokes about Sarah Sanders' appearance and about Kellyanne Conway being crushed by a tree. And all around, it was just a real example of the disdain that the White House press corps and the liberal media has for Americans, conservatives, anyone who really thinks differently from them. But the dinner was back on Saturday night, and we actually got to hear President Joe Biden try his hand at a couple of jokes. Here's one about his predecessor, Donald Trump.
This is the first time the president attended this dinner in 6 years. It's understandable. We had a horrible plague, followed by 2 years of COVID.
Well, isn't that nice? From the unifier in chief, guys. Remember, Biden is going to bring the country together. He's going to get rid of the crazy partisan divide. He's going to bring together people in the center of the aisle. And here he is at the White House Correspondents' Dinner referring to Trump, who is still the most popular person in the Republican Party, as a horrible plague. That is so unifying. I can't believe that Republicans can't get on board with this guy just trying to bring the country together. There's this other really horrible moment in this for Biden. I'm not going to play any more of his jokes because they were written by like Ron Klain and other White House staffers, so we already know they're not very funny. But there was a moment where Trevor Noah, who is the host of The Daily Show and was the comic that they brought in for this year's dinner, made a joke about the rising prices under the Biden administration, and Biden's reaction was pretty telling. Let's go ahead and give that a look.
I think ever since you've come into office, things are really looking up. Gas is up, rent is up, food is up, everything. No, it really has been a tough first year for you, Mr. President.
Yeah, so that's a nice let them eat cake moment from our current president. Also, Bentley, my cat, has decided to join us, so that is nice. But I typically think it's a good idea to be able to laugh at yourself, but when you're laughing at a joke that is referencing the fact that millions of Americans are having a hard time filling up their gas tank and putting food on their table as a direct result of your policies and or inaction, then it's probably a good idea to sit that one out. But let's talk a little bit more about Trevor Noah's jokes at the dinner. I typically don't think he's very funny. I guess I'll give him a little bit of credit. He did decide to go after all sides of the aisle during his speech. I thought he went a little bit harder on Fox News than others, not surprising. But he did make a couple of jokes about like MSNBC hiring Jen Psaki and things like that. But even when comics do this sort of equal opportunity thing, when you know that they're left wing, it really falls flat because it feels like all of the people that are being made fun of are really in on the joke. And that's just not as funny to me. I feel like if you're going to be ribbing some of the most powerful people in the country, they shouldn't really be in on the joke. Like, your joke should cut a little bit deeper, right? And that's not the case here because we know that all the people in this room are friends, that there's this revolving door between government and the media, and the late night shows are always nice to Biden and tough on Trump and all the Republicans. And it's just like kind of sickening to watch them all sit at this dinner where they paid thousands of dollars for tables and $300 a ticket, and they go in and they have their hearty hard laughs. And they try to claim that this is the one night of the year where they don't have this tense relationship between one another. And by they, I mean the media and government. But it's actually the opposite, right? This is the one night where they can drop the veil. It's not the one night where they can be friendly. It's the one night where they don't have to pretend not to be friendly. Because we know that the media at this point is just an arm of the left-wing people, of activists of the Democratic Party. There's also this crazy hypocrisy where the dinner is supposed to be celebrating the First Amendment and the fact that reporters can do their jobs in America freely. And a lot of news outlets were talking about that specifically this year in reference to the fact that Trump was out of office and Biden, quote unquote, respects the press or whatever. But really, Biden has been one of the least accessible modern presidents. He doesn't do those Marine One gaggles like Trump did. He rarely speaks off the cuff to reporters in general. And when he does, he always talks about how he's going to get in trouble by his press team. He has had maybe one full press conference with reporters where he took questions from pretty much everybody. He's done hardly any sit-down interviews with the media. He doesn't go on TV like Trump used to do. And it's very empty, I think. If you're going to talk about how someone is respecting the press, but then locks down access, is that really respect? That's an empty kind of respect. It doesn't really mean anything. And it's all a good reminder that this is a dog and pony show, right? This dinner ostensibly exists to celebrate the First Amendment, to hand out awards to great journalists, but really this is just about elite hobnobbing. This is about the almost famous White House correspondents getting to feel like they're close to the seat of power, and the people in government being able to soften up reporters so that they're not as tough on them. I think it would be a good idea to just get rid of this dinner entirely. If people want to fund scholarships for young journalists, that's great, but they don't need to go and have some rubber chicken at an event at the Washington Hilton or wherever this was and pretend to laugh at themselves to do it. Final topic for today, I want to give you guys a little recap of the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial that's going on actually pretty close to me in Fairfax, Virginia. I always like to cover cultural issues a little bit on my podcast because I think it's important for conservatives to pay attention to culture. Of course, Andrew Breitbart famously said that politics is downstream of culture. And we're seeing this really interesting shift in the way people are talking about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard because she put this narrative into the media a long time ago that he was abusive to her when they were married. And now the energy is shifting, so to speak. People are hearing Johnny Depp's side of the story in this trial, which is a defamation suit, I believe, against Amber Heard for making these claims publicly. And people are really taking Johnny's side, and I think for good reason. If you have watched any of the trial, I'm going to show you guys a few highlights. He has made the case really well that she was actually the abuser in this relationship, and he kind of did everything he could to keep this from escalating. So one of the craziest claims that has come out of the trial in general is that Amber Heard allegedly took a dump on Johnny Depp's bed as a way of getting back at him. And my favorite thing about this story is the way Johnny Depp describes what happened. Let's go ahead and watch that.
When I came back downstairs, she was on the phone with Io Tillett Wright, and they were making a wonderful point of just how funny it was that I thought that some human being had actually dropped a grumpy, pardon the term, onto the bed, and they were yucking it up. They were laughing about the whole thing, and it was. You know, it was a tough couple of days, and I really didn't feel like I deserved that.
I've got to say, I have never heard anyone describe that as a grumpy before. Who says that? It's kind of hilarious, but also just straight up bizarre. But getting into some of the more horrific and tragic claims, Johnny Depp says that, again, in complete contrast to Amber Heard's claims that he was an abuser, that she was actually the one abusing him. And there was one specific incident that he recalled where he injured his finger very badly, and he says that he actually severed the tip of it, and there's photos of the injury that he showed in trial. And apparently Amber Heard got really angry at him and threw a liquor bottle at him, and the liquor bottle, I guess, smashed, and a piece of it cut his finger off. And there are other witnesses to this who say they were trying to find his finger, and really just a horrific incident of alleged abuse. He also claims that Amber Heard would hit him and punch him quite often. And I think the biggest sort of gotcha moment in this trial was when Johnny Depp revealed that he actually had audio of Amber Heard admitting to hitting him. And she tells him that she didn't punch him, she just hit him, as if that's somehow better. But let's go ahead and listen to that.
I said to Travis, I said to you, hey, tell Travis what just happened.
You told me to do it. You told me to. You said, go do that.
I said, no, tell him what just happened.
And I lied.
And that you punched me in the
You're
fucking thing. And
you figured it out.
And you said, no, I didn't. What the fuck are you talking about? And I watched you lie. And then
I didn't punch you, by the way. I'm sorry that I didn't hit you across the face in a proper slap, but I was hitting you. It was not punching you. Babe, you're not punched.
Don't tell me what it feels like to be punched.
You know, you've been in a lot of fights. You've been around a long time. I know. Yeah.
No, when you fucking have a close
You didn't get punched. You got hit. I'm sorry I hit you like this, but I did not punch you. I did not fucking deck you. I fucking was hitting you. I don't know what the motion of my actual hand was, but you're fine. I did not hurt you. I did not punch you. I was hitting you.
How are you tough?
What am I supposed to do? Do this? I'm not sitting here bitching about it, am I? You are. That's the difference between me and you. You're a fucking baby.
Because you started.
You are such a baby. Grow the fuck up,
because you
Johnny.
started physical fights.
I did start a physical fight.
Yeah, you did. So I had to
Because-
get the fuck out of there.
Yes, you did. So you did the right thing, the big thing. You know what? You are admirable.
Really just horrible stuff, and you can tell just how manipulative she is in the way that she talks to him. It's like she's not just trying to convince him, she's almost trying to convince herself. And to me, this sounds like a narcissist. And even more so when you hear this next clip in which Johnny Depp again records her, and she mocks the idea that he could be a male abuse victim. Like, she says, no one's gonna believe you if you tell them that I did this to you. Listen to this.
Amber, I lost a fucking finger, man. Come on. I had a mineral can of mineral spirits thrown at my nose.
You can please tell people that it was a fair fight and see what the jury and judge think. Tell the world, Johnny. Tell them, Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp, man, I'm a victim too of domestic violence, and
Yes.
it's a fair fight. And see how many people believe or side with you.
That is an absolutely psychotic woman. Like, you cannot tell me otherwise. After hearing that clip, and she says, who would believe that you, Johnny Depp, could be an abuse victim? It takes a very sick person to say something like that. And that combined with the clip where she admits to hitting him but says she didn't punch him and basically tells him to grow a pair, those two clips combined, like, sealed the whole deal for me. I don't know if he also abused her. I haven't seen any evidence of that besides what she's claimed. But man, like, those two clips made quite clear that she was abusive to him, and she has spent the past few years just absolutely dragging his name through the mud. He lost a role in the Fantastic Beasts movie because of the UK libel suit that he actually lost, but that was not against Amber Heard, that was against The Sun. And it is pretty hard to prove libel claims against a newspaper or a media outlet. But he was asked to step down from that movie, so he lost this role because of her. Disney, I think, really just cut ties with him, even though he had been the star of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And this is all, to me, a reminder of the importance of due process and not believing all women like the left likes to tell us to do, because we know that men can be the victim of these types of crimes of abuse or sexual assault or harassment or all of these other issues that have for a long time been claimed to affect only women. And you end up not being able to support a lot of male victims because they're afraid to come forward because, as Amber Heard demonstrates in this clip, people just don't believe them. They're more inclined to believe women who come forward. And I think we just, all around, we have to do a better job of supporting men who are going through issues. I mean, if you look, especially in the pandemic, at the rise in suicides and drug overdoses and alcoholism, it's just really tragic that we have not allowed people to deal with their issues in a healthy way, and that when they do try to deal with their issues, they are shut down or blamed or shamed. And I think that happens more often with men than it does with women, because we're just more likely to believe that women could be victimized. So I'm watching this trial pretty closely. Amber Heard is actually testifying now. So hopefully on next week's episode, we'll be able to follow up and check out the latest developments on this case. So that is going to be it for this week's episode, the inaugural episode of Unfit to Print. I want to thank you guys so much for watching and listening. It really means a lot. Again, if you liked the show, if you want to see more of the show, please subscribe via YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And if you can, go ahead and donate, tip, whatever you want to call it, at amberathey.supercast.com. We'd really appreciate it. And in the meantime, we will see you next week.